Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
That suits a beggar like you, does it not, cheap and worthless? Margot leaned across the cherrywood conference table. Her perfume hit the back of my throat, masking the smell of old paper and dust in the law office. Above us, the ceiling vent rattled a steady metallic rhythm. I kept my hands pressed flat against my thighs. My fingernails were cut down to the quick-filed blunt from 5 years of washing bedpans and changing soiled linen. "Did you really think caring for Mom would get you everything?" Margot asked. Her tone carried the exact patronizing sweetness she used to close million-dollar property deals. "That's not how the world works, sweetie. You sat in that house changing dirty sheets while I built an actual career." Bernard Klein adjusted his spectacles. The dry parchment of the will rustled loudly as he turned the page, pointedly ignoring my sister. The primary residence at 412 Sycamore Lane. Klein read, his voice dropping into a flat monotone valued at $385,000, inclusive of all contents, and the surrounding 1.2-acre lot is bequeathed to Margot Elaine Prout. Margot stopped scrolling on her phone. She placed the device face down on the polished wood. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. The commercial property at 7 Old Mill Road. Klein continued looking at me over his lenses. "The former florist shop, including the structure lot and any contents therein, is bequeathed to Jolene Marie Pruitt." "The flower shop," I said. The words tasted like dry ash. "There is a personal letter attached to each bequest," Klein added. Margot stood up. The legs of her leather chair scraped sharply against the marble floor. She snatched her folder off the table. "I will read mine later," she said. Her high heels clicked erect, a rapid beat toward the oak door. She grabbed the brass handle, paused, and looked back over her shoulder. "Mom always said flowers were your thing," Margot said. "I guess she meant it literally." The door clicked shut. Klein sighed. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Jolene, your mother asked that I tell you one thing personally." I unclasped my hands. "What?" "She said to go to the shop. Do not send anyone. Go yourself." The drive took 20 minutes. I took Route 46 through the center of town. I passed the old brick high school and the corner diner where Mom used to buy us blueberry pancakes before Dad left. My phone vibrated violently in the plastic cup holder. Wade was calling. I tapped the speaker button. "How did it go?" Wade asked. His voice was a low, steady rumble over the static of the connection. "She got the house," I said. I kept my eyes locked on the yellow lines dividing the asphalt. "I got the flower shop." 3 heavy seconds of silence passed. Wade did not ask about the financial imbalance. He had been there for all 5 years. He had cooked the dinners and carried her frail body down the stairs. "The flower shop," Wade repeated. It was a statement. "Are you going there right now?" Mom said too. "Do you want me to come?" She said to go myself. "Call me when you are done," Wade said. I ended the call and turned the radio off. The faded wooden facade of the florist shop looked smaller than I remembered. The weather-beaten boards were stripped of their original white paint. The painted letters above the door were peeling so badly that the letter G had almost entirely flaked away. The front windows were caked with years of thick grime. There was no traffic on Old Mill Road. The silence was broken only by the wind whistling through the loose wooden slats of the siding. I stood on the cracked concrete step. The new key Klein had given me felt freezing cold against my palm. A thin ring of rust coated the collar of the metal. I pushed it into the lock. The tumblers were stiff. I had to throw my right shoulder against the wooden door to force it open. The smell hit me the moment the weather stripping gave way. It was an odor of dampness, rotting floorboards, and the stale earth left behind in dead potting soil. But underneath the decay, hovering faintly in the stale air, was the distinct scent of dried gardenias. The dry dust settled on my tongue as I stepped inside. The shop was as she had left it. The long wooden counter where she used to trim stems stood in the center, scarred with deep gouges from her floral knife. The iron shelving units lined the walls, holding empty ceramic pots and plastic trays. The large glass floral refrigerator sat dead in the corner, its doors clouded with a milky film. Everything was in its place, but the life had been completely drained out of the room. I walked to the back of the shop. The rear wall was made of exposed brick, old and crumbling at the mortar joints. I ran my bare hands over the rough, cold surface of the clay. I dropped to my knees near the baseboard, tracing the lines where the floor met the wall. In the bottom right corner, 2 individual bricks protruded, perhaps 1/8 of an inch further than the rest. Anyone walking by would have assumed it was just sloppy masonry. I gripped the rough edges of the first brick and pulled. It slid out with a soft scraping sound. The second brick followed just as easily. Behind the masonry lay a dark, hollow cavity. I reached my hand into the cold space. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled out an envelope. The flap was sealed shut. Across the front, written in her familiar cursive, were the words, "For Jolene. Read alone." I reached in again. I pulled out a clear plastic folder stuffed with dense legal documents, a stack of stapled property surveys, and photocopies of bank statements. Resting on top of the plastic folder was a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses. I picked up the glasses. I brought them close to my face. The faint, unmistakable scent of her daily hand lotion mixed with the chemical odor of prescription pain medication drifted off the frames. The lenses still bore the smudged fingerprints she had left behind. "Mom," I whispered. I sank down onto the cracked tile floor, resting my back against the freezing brick wall. My hands started to tremble. I broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out the letter. The handwriting was shaky and uneven, the strokes frantic, clearly written when the illness had already taken deep root in her nervous system. "Jolene, if you are reading this, you came. I knew you would. Your sister would not. The shop is too small for her, too old, too far from anything that matters to her. But you would come because this was ours. I am sorry the will looks the way it does. Margot made sure of that. She has been visiting the county clerk office since January. I know because Dorothy at the office mentioned it to Dot, and Dot told me. Everything you need is in this folder. The original land survey, the trust account your grandmother left for both of you, and my notes. I couldn't stop Margot from changing the papers, but I could make sure you found the truth. Do not be angry at me for leaving you the shop. I didn't leave you the building. I left you the proof. And Jolene, those 5 years? I saw every single day. Love, Mom." She knew. She'd lain in that hospital bed tube strapped to her bruised arms, half her waking hours lost in a narcotic haze. But she knew what Margot was doing. The county clerk visits, the altered surveys. And because her body was failing, she'd gathered the ammunition in secret and trusted me to find it. For 5 years, I thought I was just keeping her alive. She was keeping me armed. I set the letter on my lap and opened the plastic folder. The original land survey. I'm an accountant. I stare at numbers 40 hours a week. The property value on the genuine survey didn't match the handwritten notes Mom had clipped to the margins. Margot hadn't just taken the house. She'd falsified the data to make the shop appear worthless on paper. I reached into the envelope one last time and pulled out a small white rectangle of cardstock. It was a business card. Franklin Porter, attorney at Law, Real Estate, and Probate. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed the 10 digits printed on the card. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. "Porter Law Office, how can I direct your call?" a receptionist asked. "I need to speak with Frank Porter," I said. "Tell him Maeve Pruitt's daughter is calling." A long silence stretched over the receiver. I could hear the faint sound of a keyboard clacking in the background. Then the receptionist spoke again. One moment. I spread every single document across the bare laminate surface of the small kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed, casting a harsh and sterile glare over the stacked papers, leaving the living room and the hallway swallowed in deep evening shadows. Wade sat across from me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply pushed a steaming ceramic mug of black coffee across the table until it touched the edge of my legal pad, and then he waited. The apartment was suffocatingly quiet. The only sound was the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator compressor kicking into gear. I picked up my mother's handwritten letter for the 3rd time. I read it slower this time, letting my eyes trace the frantic, uneven loops of her blue ink. When I reached the bottom, I set the letter aside and opened the clear plastic folder. I placed the original property survey from 2019 on the left. I placed the photocopied public record I had pulled from the county files on the right. Below them, I fanned out the trust fund statements from my grandmother's account. 20 minutes of silence passed. The coffee in my mug stopped steaming. Wade leaned forward and rested his large, calloused hands flat on the table. He looked at the 2 distinct survey documents. "How much difference are we looking at?" I didn't look up from the columns of numbers. "The original survey values the shop lot at $210,000. Margot's version says $74,000. Wade stared at the paper. "That is not a rounding error." "No," I said, tracing the fraudulent total with the blunt tip of my pen. "That is a crime." The numbers blurred on the page. 5 years of adjusting pillows and measuring morphine while Margot drove downtown to alter legal documents. And Mom had known the entire time, trapped in a failing body, unable to fight back. So she'd gathered the evidence in secret and hidden the weapons for me. "What do you want to do about this?" Wade asked. I picked up the small white business card belonging to Frank Porter. I rolled the stiff paper between my thumb and index finger, feeling the raised lettering. "I already called him," I said. The next morning I drove to the office of Henderson and Associates. I sat in my gray fabric cubicle, functioning exactly as the world expected me to. I reconciled client account statements. I verified outstanding invoices. I highlighted discrepancies in quarterly tax filings. But my mind remained focused on the manila folder sitting locked in the trunk of my car. During my lunch break, I pushed my sandwich aside and opened a new browser tab. I typed the words "Indiana Code Penalty for Land Survey Fraud" into the search bar. I clicked through dense legal statutes and paragraphs of penal codes. My eyes scanned the definitions of intentional misrepresentation and felony theft. My desk phone buzzed at exactly 2 p.m. It was Frank Porter's office. His assistant confirmed my appointment for the following morning. I bookmarked the page detailing criminal fraud statutes, then methodically cleared my browser history before returning to the spreadsheets. A coworker paused by the opening of my cubicle holding a stack of incoming mail. "Are you okay, Jolene? You have been staring at that exact same spreadsheet for a solid hour." "Fine," I said. It was the automatic response of someone who had been conditioned from childhood to never ask for help. I turned back to my monitor and kept typing. Frank Porter's office sat above a crumbling brick building on Kirkwood Avenue. Law books stacked floor to ceiling. A dark wood desk buried under folders. On the wall, a faded photo of a younger Frank shaking hands on the courthouse steps. The copy machine next door thumped a steady rhythm. The wall clock ticked. The leather chair was cold when I sat down. The folder on my lap felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Frank was 58, silver-haired, with reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck. He shook my hand firmly and studied my face for 3 seconds before speaking. "You look exactly like her," Frank said. "Maeve, you have the exact same eyes." I lifted the heavy folder from my lap and placed it squarely in the center of his desk. "She left this for me, hidden inside the wall of the flower shop." Frank looked down at the frayed edges of the envelope. He didn't reach for it right away. "She told me she would do exactly that. About a year ago. She said if anything happened to her, her daughter would call me." "You knew?" I asked. "I knew she was preparing for something," Frank said, leaning back in his chair. "She didn't tell me the specifics of the situation. She just asked me to be ready." I flipped open the cover of the folder and spread the documents out across his desk. Frank slipped his glasses onto the bridge of his nose and began to read. 10 full minutes passed in silence. A lawyer reads differently than an accountant. He reads slowly, absorbing the implications of every single comma. I sat still, listening to the mechanical ticking of the wall clock counting the seconds. Frank finally looked up. "The original survey was conducted by Henderson Surveying in May of 2019. Your mother ordered it personally, and the one currently on file at the county clerk?" I asked. Frank turned to his computer monitor and clicked his mouse a few times, pulling up the public database. "Filed by Hendricks Survey Company, January of this year. It is a different company. And the numerical values are different. Henderson and Hendricks," I said, pointing at the screen. "She intentionally used a company with almost the exact same name." Frank pulled off his glasses and let them hang against his chest. "Your sister is a licensed real estate agent. She is in the top 5% of sellers in Indianapolis," I said. "Then she knows what she did," Frank said. "This was not an administrative accident. This was a calculated professional job." He paused, tapping his pen against the edge of the desk. "The trust fund," Frank continued, "the one established by your grandmother. It was originally set up to benefit both daughters equally, but the disbursement routing was altered 4 years ago. I would need to subpoena the bank records to confirm exactly who authorized the change. 4 years ago," I said. "That is when Mom received the stage 3 cancer diagnosis." Frank nodded his head very slowly. "She started stealing from the estate while Mom was actively getting sick," I said. Frank did not offer an apology or an empty platitude. "A lawyer deals in facts, not comfort. I can file an official petition to reopen the survey record. Simultaneously, we contest the validity of the trust disbursement. If both actions are proven fraudulent, the entire distribution of the will can be legally challenged." "How long will that take?" I asked. "Weeks to get the initial filing through," Frank said. "Months to resolve the litigation. Unless she agrees to settle." "She will not settle," I said. Then we take the evidence public, Frank replied. Go public. The words pressed down on my chest. Margot had spent 2 decades building that brand. Thousands of followers. Champagne-soaked open houses. Going public meant tearing every bit of it down. My pulse thudded at the base of my throat. Part of me wanted to pack up the papers and let Margot have everything. But I thought about Mom's letter. I left you the proof. Not a choice, not a suggestion. The proof. She wanted me to use it. This wasn't about an inheritance anymore. This was about the 5 years Mom spent watching the theft, unable to fight back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to just be fine. I need to see this through, I told him. Frank studied my face. I have one question for you. What is it? Did your mother specifically choose me to handle this, or did she just happen to leave my business card in the wall? Frank smiled, a tight, knowing smile. She came to this exact office, last March, sitting in a wheelchair. Your partner Wade drove her and waited outside. She sat right where you are sitting now, and she looked me dead in the eye. She said when my daughter Jolene calls, she's going to need someone who knows dirt from clean paperwork. The corner of my mouth twitched upward. I almost smiled. She actually said that, I asked. Those were her exact words, Frank said. Maeve Pruitt was a very precise woman. She certainly was, I said. Frank Porter placed the stack of legal documents squarely in the center of his dark wooden desk. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, Petition to reopen survey record. He pulled a blue ink pen from his shirt pocket and handed it across the table to me. The pen was cold in my hand. I signed my name on the petition line and watched the blue ink dry. 3 weeks since we buried her. I'd just become the plaintiff in a lawsuit against my own sister. Was this what Mom wanted? She'd left the proof, yes. But did she want me to drag our name through court or just to know the truth? I looked at the forged numbers pinned to Frank's bulletin board. No. She didn't spend her final months hiding documents just so I could fold them into a drawer. She wanted a reckoning. Once I officially file this document with the county clerk, Frank said, reaching across the desk to take the pen back, Margot will know about it. Her name is formally attached to the current public record. The clerk office is legally required to send her a direct notification. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap. When exactly will she find out? The county usually processes these specific requests in 5 to 7 business days, Frank explained. He tapped the edges of the paper against his desk to organize them into a neat stack. But knowing your sister and her extensive real estate connections downtown, she might get a courtesy phone call much sooner than that. I adjusted my grip on the strap of my purse. Good. Let her sweat. Frank paused his organizing. He raised one thick gray eyebrow, looking at me as if he was seeing a different person sitting in his office. It was the very first time I had ever spoken about my sister with teeth. I will call you the minute the court confirms the filing, Frank said. He stood up from his chair, signaling the end of the meeting. But Jolene, I need you to listen to me on one more thing. The flower shop on Old Mill Road. Do not try to sell it right now. Do not touch the physical structure of the building. And do not let anyone else inside. That commercial property might be worth considerably more than you think once the genuine land survey is officially entered on the public record. I nodded once, picked up my purse, and walked out into the cold hallway. The following Saturday morning, I unlocked the front door of Pruitt's garden. I didn't go there to dig for more hidden legal evidence. I went because I desperately needed a place in the world that belonged entirely to me. My apartment belonged to Wade and me. My small gray cubicle belonged to Henderson and Associates. The old flower shop was the only physical space on Earth that my mother had explicitly given to me alone. Wade drove his truck over and came inside with me. We worked in total comfortable silence for the first 2 solid hours. He brought a large yellow plastic bucket filled with steaming, warm water and strong liquid wood soap. I swept the layer of dirt off the cracked tile floor while he scrubbed the deep gouges in the wooden counter. I walked to the front of the shop and pushed hard against the large glass windows. The rusty metal hinges screamed in loud protest, but they finally gave way and swung open. Fresh morning air swept directly into the stale room, chasing away the heavy smell of rot and dry dust. Thick motes of debris floated and spun lazily in the bright columns of golden sunlight piercing through the open frames. Wade had brought his small, portable radio from the garage. He set it on the edge of the deep porcelain sink in the back room and tuned the dial to a local country music station. The soft and familiar sound of Dolly Parton singing about a coat of many colors echoed warmly off the exposed brick walls. I walked behind the main front counter to gather a messy pile of old paper receipts. I kneeled down on the hard floor to wipe the dust off the very bottom wooden shelf. My wet rag hit something heavy tucked far back in the dark corner near the baseboard. I reached my arm into the shadows and pulled the object out into the light. It was a notebook bound in worn brown leather. I stood up and rested the heavy book flat on the clean counter. The pages were slightly yellowed and soft at the edges from years of humidity. The leather cover smelled faintly of dry earth and old pressed leaves. I gently opened the front cover. The pages were filled with my mother's neat, looping handwriting. The very first date at the top of the page was from the spring of 2005. I slowly turned the crisp paper, reading the lines. The entries detailed ordinary floral orders. They listed preferred flower types for local church events and special delivery instructions for her regular elderly customers. I traced my finger over a line detailing a wedding bouquet of white roses. It was just an old business ledger. I smiled at the familiar shape of her cursive letters, closed the leather cover, and set it aside to take home with me later. I didn't bother reading all the way to the back pages. I looked up at the highest metal shelf bolted against the back wall. The small glass jar holding the dried gardenias sat where it had been for over 15 years. I pulled over a wooden stepping stool, climbed up, and carefully brought the glass jar down. The delicate petals were a deep, brittle brown color, but they still held their perfect blooming shape. Wade walked out of the back room holding a dripping wet rag. He looked at the freshly cleaned wooden counter, the wide-open front windows, and then he looked at me holding the glass jar of dead flowers. "Are you going to officially reopen it?" Wade asked. His voice was a low rumble over the country music playing from the back room. I looked around the empty, echoing space. The dead floral refrigerator sat dark in the corner. "It is just an empty building, Wade." He walked over, leaned his heavy shoulder against the doorframe, and crossed his arms over his chest. He looked at me with steady, serious eyes. "It is not just a building," Jolene Wade said quietly, "and you know it." I didn't answer him. I didn't have the right words to explain the feeling settling in my chest. But when we finally locked the front door an hour later, I didn't put the brown leather notebook back under the wooden counter. I slipped it safely into my canvas tote bag and carried it out to the car. That following Tuesday evening, I sat alone on the edge of my sofa in our small apartment. The television was playing softly in the background, showing a cooking program I wasn't actually watching. I was staring down at my glowing phone screen. Margot kept her professional real estate social media profile public. She had to. Her entire lucrative personal brand relied on maximum daily visibility and projecting total success. I tapped my thumb on her latest video update. The video began playing immediately. Margot was standing squarely in the center of the living room inside our childhood home on Sycamore Lane. The house looked unrecognizable to me. The yellow floral wallpaper our mother had painstakingly chosen 20 years ago was gone, replaced by stark and sterile white drywall. A loud crew of men in work boots walked back and forth in the background of the video, carrying pieces of the old, familiar oak kitchen cabinets right out the front door to a waiting dumpster. Margot wore a tailored blazer and her blonde hair was flawlessly blown out. She held the camera high, panning around the gutted room. "Exciting things are coming to the market very soon," Margot said into the camera, flashing her bright and practiced smile. "We are completely renovating this gorgeous historic property to serve as the centerpiece for my brand new independent brokerage firm. Keep a close eye out for the grand open house invitations next month. It is going to be the start of a beautiful new chapter for the local luxury market." My stomach turned over tight and sick. She was actively gutting the physical evidence of our mother's entire life and using the leftover bones to build her own corporate empire. She called the destruction a beautiful new chapter. My phone vibrated violently against my palm, instantly cutting off Margot's cheerful recorded voice. The caller identification text flashing across the screen showed Frank Porter. I took a deep breath, accepted the call, and pressed the cold phone to my ear. "Hello," I said. Jolene Frank said immediately. His voice was devoid of his usual calm bedside manner. He sounded focused on business. "I just received a formal email correspondence from a senior partner at Whitaker Lang over in Indianapolis." I sat up completely straight. The rough fabric of the sofa cushion scratched against my bare arms. I set my bare feet flat on the floor. "Who exactly is Whitaker Lang?" I asked. "They are one of the most expensive and aggressive corporate law firms in the entire state," Frank explained. I could hear him aggressively typing on his computer keyboard in the background. Margot received the official county notification regarding the property survey petition late this afternoon. She didn't call the clerk to ask questions. She immediately hired a legal team to represent her. I looked at the frozen image of Margot, smiling brightly on my phone screen. Her eyes looked dead behind the perfect makeup. She knew. She knew I had found the hidden documents inside the brick wall. The quiet, secret gathering of our evidence was officially over. Margot was terrified of what I held in my hands, and terrified people with deep bank accounts did not just surrender. They hired expensive men in expensive suits to bury their problems under a mountain of threatening paperwork. "Are they filing a response to the county clerk?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "They are doing much more than that," Frank said. The typing stopped. "They are preparing a counterattack, and they are going to come after you hard." I looked out the dark apartment window at the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. "Let them come," I said. I spent 45 minutes in line at the county clerk's office under buzzing fluorescent lights. I handed the clerk my request forms and walked out with a brown envelope of certified public records. At Frank's office, I didn't sit in the client chair. I stood next to his desk and spread the papers out side by side. This was my territory. I was an accountant. I knew how to read a paper trail. I placed the original land survey on the left side of the desk. I placed the public county record on the right. "Henderson Surveying has been a licensed business in this state since 1987, Frank said. He leaned over the desk, tracing the letterhead on the original document with the blunt end of his silver pen. "They are fully bonded. They have a physical office out on Highway 46. Your mother hired them directly." I looked at the document on the right. "And the one Margot filed with the county is from Hendricks Survey Company. The name is almost identical. If you were a tired clerk skimming through a stack of property filings at 4 p.m, you would never catch the difference." "Look at the corporate registration details at the bottom of the page," Frank instructed. He tapped the paper. I leaned closer. The text was small and densely packed. "Registered in January of this year. Dissolved completely by the end of March. It was a shell company. It existed for less than 90 days. Created for this exact purpose," Frank said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Look at the name of the registered agent who filed the incorporation paperwork." I ran my finger across the printed ink. The name listed was M.E. Kessler. My breath caught in my throat. The buzzing of the small copy machine in the other room suddenly seemed very far away. "Kessler," I whispered. I kept my eyes locked on the letters. "That is Margot. Her middle name is Elaine. Kessler is her married name. She kept Pruitt for all her professional real estate branding after the divorce because she had already built her network around it. But her legal name on her state identification from the marriage is still Kessler." Frank took off his reading glasses and let them drop against his chest. "She created a fake surveying company under her ex-husband's surname. She used it to formally appraise the commercial property at a fraction of its actual worth. Then she dissolved the company to cover her tracks. She hadn't just tweaked a few numbers on a spreadsheet. She had gone through the exhausting, methodical process of incorporating a fake business with the state. This was not a sudden crime of opportunity committed by a grieving daughter. This was a cold, calculated blueprint." Frank reached into his own open briefcase and pulled out another sheet of paper. "I have one more thing for you. I requested the public visitor logs from the county clerk office for the past calendar year." He set the log down on top of the fraudulent survey. I scanned the columns of printed names and entry times. Margot had signed into the building 3 separate times in the 4 months leading up to our mother passing away. I stared at the final date on the list. I remembered that specific Tuesday. It was raining heavily. The hospice nurse had told me to start making the final arrangements. My mother had been unconscious for 3 straight days, her breathing a terrible rattling sound that echoed through the quiet house. I had sat in the dark bedroom holding her thin hand, praying for her pain to finally stop. "The last time Margot walked into this building to file these fake papers," I said, my voice dropping into a flat, hollow tone, "was 2 weeks before Mom died." Frank did not say anything. He just looked at me. He understood that there were no words left to soften the reality sitting on his desk. By Thursday night, the kitchen table was a war room. Past 2 in the morning, 4th cup of coffee, Wade asleep on the couch, TV muted blue light on his face. I'd drawn a spreadsheet across a yellow legal pad, matching bank statements to dates. Grandma's trust fund set up in '98 for both daughters. $180,000. I tracked the disbursements. 4 years ago, withdrawals started. $155,000 routed into a holding account linked to Margot's brokerage. That left $25,000 for me, just enough that a tired, grieving woman might accept it and walk away. The first transfer date, March 12th. I closed my eyes. I remembered the oncology waiting room, the doctor saying carcinoma for the first time. Driving Mom home in silence, hands shaking on the wheel. And while I was gripping that wheel, Margot was dialing the bank. She started before Mom was even in chemo, I whispered out loud to the empty kitchen. The breathing from the living room stopped. The worn springs of the couch groaned. Wade sat up, slowly rubbing his face. He squinted against the bright overhead light and looked at me sitting surrounded by papers. Started what Wade asked, his voice thick with sleep. I didn't move my eyes from the yellow legal pad. Stealing. She started stealing the money while Mom was still digesting her cancer diagnosis. Wade pushed himself off the couch. He walked slowly into the kitchen and stood behind my chair. He rested his large, warm hands on my shoulders. How much did she take? Wade asked quietly. I tapped the bottom of the column with my pen. $155,000 from the trust account, plus the value of the house on Sycamore Lane, plus the devalued amount from the fake shop survey. The total she tried to take is close to $600,000 that should have been split down the middle. Wade squeezed my shoulders. His hands were strong and steady. He didn't act shocked. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the numbers written in my neat accounting handwriting. Are you going to let her keep it? Wade asked. I looked at the date of the cancer diagnosis again. I thought about the 3 trips to the county clerk. I thought about the heavy, expensive envelope her lawyers had sent me. No, I said. I am going to take back every dime. Sunday morning brought a break in the gray clouds. The pale sunlight fought its way through the branches of the old oak trees lining Old Mill Road. I spent the entire morning at the flower shop. I didn't bring any legal folders or bank statements with me. I needed to work with my hands. I needed to touch physical things that made sense. I wiped down the long wooden counter with oil soap until the deep scratches in the grain seemed to fade into a rich, dark polish. I reorganized the iron shelves, lining them up straight against the exposed brick wall. Wade was lying flat on his back on the damp floor in the rear storage room. He had his metal toolbox open beside him. He was wrestling with a rusted pipe wrench, trying to fix a massive leak under the deep porcelain sink. The sharp metallic squeal of the wrench biting into the old pipes echoed loudly off the hard tile floors. I walked over to the massive glass floral refrigerator sitting dark in the corner. I found the black power cord coiled behind it. I plugged it directly into the wall outlet. For 3 long seconds, nothing happened. Then a loud, violent shudder shook the entire metal frame. The compressor kicked on with a low, vibrating hum that rattled the glass doors. The interior lights flickered twice before glowing with a steady, brilliant white light. The machine was old and loud, but it was still fighting to stay alive. It just needed someone to plug it in. The small brass bell above the front door jingled brightly. Dot Tatum walked inside carrying a white cardboard bakery box tied with string. She wore a knit sweater and smelled strongly of cinnamon and cheap vanilla perfume. She stopped in the center of the clean room and looked around, nodding her head in slow approval. It smells like a real place again, Dot said. She walked over and set the bakery box down on the freshly oiled wood counter. Your mama and I used to stand right here on a Saturday morning doing the weekend arrangements. She had magic hands, Jolene. I swear to you, that woman could take a $15 bucket of roadside weeds and make it look like a $100 centerpiece. I smiled. The memory of my mother standing at this exact counter, her fingers stained green from cutting thick flower stems, hit me with a sudden warm ache. She always knew what to cut away to make the good parts grow, I said. Dot patted my hand. She certainly did. And she taught you how to do it too. Wade walked out of the back room, wiping thick black grease off his hands with a rag. The sink is holding water. No more leaks. I walked to the front of the shop and pushed the heavy glass windows open. The cool Sunday breeze swept into the room carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. The shop did not feel like a dark tomb anymore. The dust was gone. The shadows were gone. The refrigerator was humming a steady heartbeat in the corner. The shop felt different now. It felt like it was waiting. I stood at the open window and looked down the empty gravel road. Margot had her expensive lawyers. She had her budget. She was preparing to bury me under a mountain of threatening paperwork starting Monday morning. She thought I was just a tired accountant who would eventually fold under the pressure, but I was standing inside the fortress my mother had built for me, and the storm was finally here. The envelope waiting inside my rusted metal mailbox on Monday morning did not look like regular mail. It was made of thick, cotton bond paper that carried the distinct physical weight of a threat long before I even tore open the sealed flap. I stood in the narrow hallway of my apartment building, holding it in both hands. The corridor smelled like stale carpet and the burnt toast Wade had made for breakfast an hour earlier. I slid my thumb under the edge of the paper and pulled out a single, crisp sheet. The return address was stamped across the top in a black font. Whitaker, Lang and Associates Attorneys at Law, Indianapolis. I leaned my shoulder against the cold plaster wall of the hallway and read the short paragraphs. Your client frivolous petition constitutes harassment of our client, a respected real estate professional. Any further action will result in a counterclaim for defamation and intentional interference with business relationships seeking damages in excess of $50,000. I read the words 3 times. The fluorescent light above my head flickered with a low buzzing hum like a trapped wasp. I walked back inside my apartment, dropped my keys onto the laminate kitchen counter, and picked up my phone to dial Frank Porter. He answered on the very first ring. I didn't bother saying hello. I read the core paragraph of the letter out loud to him, keeping my voice flat and measured. She lawyered up, I said to the empty kitchen. A massive corporate firm, Whitaker, Lang, Frank replied. His tone did not shift or elevate. I could hear the rough sound of a file folder opening on his end of the line. They handle half the commercial real estate closings in Marion County. They are expensive. I looked out the small kitchen window at the empty asphalt parking lot. Should I be worried about an actual lawsuit for $50,000 in damages? They sent a cease and desist letter, Frank said. The loud scrape of his wooden chair echoed through the receiver. That is a manufactured scare tactic, Jolene. It is not a real legal argument. If your sister actually had a defensible position regarding those property records, her attorneys would have filed a formal motion to dismiss our petition with the county judge. They didn't do that. They sent you a very expensive and very scary piece of paper instead. I traced the edge of the kitchen counter with my index finger. They are trying to scare me because the numbers on my original survey are real. Because the numbers are real, Frank agreed. Hold your ground. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. Margot was actively bleeding cash to hire corporate lawyers in Indianapolis just to terrify me. She was willing to spend thousands of dollars on intimidation rather than simply explaining to a judge why 2 different land surveys existed for the exact same piece of commercial property. She couldn't explain it to anyone. She could only try to crush me under the sheer weight of her financial resources. By late Wednesday afternoon, the walls of the apartment felt too tight. I needed to be inside a space that belonged to me. I drove out to the old flower shop on Old Mill Road. The late golden hour sunlight cut perfectly through the newly cleaned front windows. Thick, lazy beams of light stretched across the scarred wooden counter, illuminating thousands of tiny dust motes floating in the quiet air. The street outside was empty. The only sound in the entire room was the soft rustle of dry paper as I opened the brown leather notebook I had found hidden under the register a few days earlier. I pulled up a tall wooden stool and sat behind the main counter. The air in the shop held the faint, ghostly scent of dried flowers mixed with the sharp odor of aging leather. The first few dozen pages of the notebook were what I had expected them to be. They were just routine floral arrangements and business ledgers. Mrs. Henderson anniversary arrangement, white roses, and baby breath, $35. Her handwriting was even practiced and steady. But as I reached the middle section of the heavy book, the blank spaces between the entries grew longer. The dates stretched further and further apart. This was the exact timeline when the sickness had truly taken hold of her body, forcing the shop to close its doors for good. I turned the paper to page 47. The ink was different here. She had stopped using her usual black felt pen and switched to a cheap blue ballpoint. The handwriting was jagged, slanting heavily to the right, trembling wildly at the edges of the letters. It wasn't a floral order. March 3rd. Margot called Hendrick's Survey Company today. I know because Dot's friend Dorothy works at the county clerk office. She mentioned the inquiry casually over coffee this morning. Dorothy does not know what it means. I do. I stopped breathing. The absolute quiet in the old shop suddenly felt heavy, pressing hard against my eardrums. I traced the shaky blue letters with my index finger and kept reading down the page. March 15th. The trust fund disbursement routing was changed. I called First National from the kitchen phone while Jolene was at the pharmacy picking up my prescriptions. The bank teller said the authorized representative made the change. I asked who. They said they could not tell me over the phone, but I already know. My chest tightened until my ribs physically ached. I turned the page. April 2nd. Jolene is downstairs making chicken soup. She doesn't know any of this is happening. I can hear her humming from the bedroom. She hums when she's tired. She doesn't even know she does it. Margot never noticed that about her. I always did. The thick leather cover of the notebook slipped from my hands and hit the wooden counter with a dull, heavy thud. I stared at the open page. The blue ink began to blur and swim across the paper. I pressed the heels of both hands hard against my mouth. My teeth bit down deeply into my bottom lip until I tasted the sharp metallic tang of copper. She hums when she's tired. All those endless, suffocating nights I sat in the corner armchair of her bedroom listening to the rhythmic hiss of her oxygen machine. I thought she was sleeping. I thought she was entirely lost in the heavy chemical fog of the liquid morphine. But she had been listening to me the entire time. She had been watching me carefully. She was writing it all down in a book meant for flowers, hiding her secret words between grocery lists and wedding orders because she knew I would be the only person in the world to ever care enough to open it. I wiped my wet face with the back of my flannel sleeve. I looked back down at the final entry on the next page. May 1st. I am getting worse. The pills make the edges of the room soft and blurry. Jolene sits with me every night. I want to tell her everything, but I cannot do it yet. She would confront Margot right now, and Margot would destroy all the evidence. Jolene needs to find it after, when it is too late for Margot to cover her tracks. This was never just about a commercial building on an empty gravel road. The old flower shop was simply the door. The notebook was the key. My mother had built an entire hidden fortress to protect me from the grave. She wasn't just hiding legal evidence against my sister. She was hiding a love letter. She put it in the one place only I would ever look because only I cared about the flowers. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of the counter, startling me so badly I nearly knocked the stool over. The caller identification showed Frank Porter. I cleared my throat twice before accepting the call. I stared down at the notebook. I just received the subpoena results directly from First National, Frank said. His voice was stripped of his usual professional pleasantries. He spoke fast and hard. The trust fund disbursement change was formally executed by someone using a medical power of attorney. It was physically signed by your mother. I kept my eyes locked on the jagged blue handwriting. Mom signed it. The physical signature is officially on file, Frank said. But Jolene, look at the timeline. Your mother was already prescribed stage 3 narcotic pain medication when this specific document was executed. Severe cognitive impairment is heavily documented in her medical charts for that entire month. She didn't know what she was signing, I said. My voice dropped into a harsh, ragged whisper. That is what we are going to prove in a courtroom, Frank said. Margot had not just stolen the money from our grandmother. She had walked into a dying woman's bedroom, placed a pen into a trembling hand, and legally exploited her own mother while she was heavily medicated on opiates. I locked the flower shop and drove back to the apartment in total silence. I didn't turn the radio on. I just listened to the steady hum of the tires against the asphalt. The anger had completely shifted inside me. It was no longer a personal grudge about getting my fair share of an inheritance. This was about protecting the legacy of a woman who had been violated while she was actively dying. When I walked through the front door of the apartment, Wade was sitting on the couch holding a pair of work boots. He looked up at me. He didn't ask how my day was. He could read the rigid posture of my shoulders perfectly. I sat down next to him and pulled out my phone. Margot had posted another renovation video. The house on Sycamore Lane looked nothing like the place where we grew up. Every trace of our mother had been scraped clean and replaced with staging furniture. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank Whitaker Lang filed a motion to dismiss plus a counterclaim for damages. They want to bury us. I locked the screen. Margot was building her empire on forged signatures and stolen trust funds. I leaned my head against Wade's shoulder. He pulled me close. I closed my eyes and thought about the blue ink in the brown leather notebook. She hums when she's tired. The mahogany door of Mr. Henderson's office clicked shut behind me. The sound was sharp and final in the quiet space. He reached out and twisted the plastic wand on the window blinds, snapping them completely closed and cutting off my view of the main accounting floor. The room smelled strongly of lemon wood polish and stale coffee. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed a low, steady note. I stood perfectly still on the thick carpet. Mr. Henderson leaned against the edge of his massive desk and crossed his arms over his chest. He didn't look me in the eye right away. He stared down at his polished leather shoes. I received a very aggressive phone call this morning, he said. His voice was tight and carefully controlled. It was from a high-profile real estate agent over in Indianapolis. She was asking pointed questions about your employment status here. She mentioned a complicated property dispute involving fraudulent claims. The blood drained completely out of my face. My stomach dropped, leaving a cold and hollow space behind my ribs. "Mr. Henderson, that is a private family estate matter," I said. I kept my hands folded tightly in front of me to hide the slight tremor in my fingers. "It has absolutely nothing to do with this firm or my work here." "I'm well aware of that," he replied, finally looking up. "And I don't want to get involved, Jolene. You are a very reliable accountant. But I cannot have my clients or my senior partners dragged into a messy legal battle over an inheritance. Keep your personal matters out of this office." Am I clearly understood? I walked back to my small gray cubicle with burning heat radiating across the back of my neck. The humiliation sat thick in my throat. I sat down in my rolling chair and stared blankly at the tax spreadsheet glowing on my monitor. Margot was actively squeezing me. She was calling my employer. She was trying to make this fight too public, too embarrassing, and too exhausting for me to survive. I waited until my lunch hour to call Frank Porter from the privacy of my car. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running, watching the rain hit the windshield. I told him exactly what had happened in the office. "It is a classic pressure tactic," Frank said over the speakerphone. His voice was calm, a sharp contrast to the frantic beating of my heart. "She cannot beat the actual paper evidence we have, so she's trying to force a total withdrawal. She wants to make it too expensive and too painful for you to continue." I gripped the leather steering wheel. "It is working." Frank let 3 long seconds of silence pass over the line. "Is it he?" finally asked. I swallowed hard. "No. Whitaker also filed a counterclaim for defamation," Frank continued. $50,000 in damages. The rain streaked down the windshield. They were throwing money at the problem because the evidence was airtight. Saturday morning broke gray and bitterly cold. I pulled my car up to the curb outside the old flower shop just after 7. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires. Before I even put the car in park, I saw the front entrance. The wooden door was sitting 3 inches ajar. I threw the car door open and ran to the concrete step. The thick brass deadbolt had been violently pried out of the rotting wood. Deep and jagged splinters covered the doorframe. The small pane of glass nearest the handle was shattered, leaving fragments glittering across the front mat in the morning frost. I pushed the door open with my shoulder. A freezing draft of wind swept through the main room. The entire shop had been systematically ransacked. The drawers behind the wooden counter were pulled completely out, dumping old paper receipts, spools of curling ribbon and rusted floral scissors all over the floor. 2 of the iron shelving units had been shoved over, crashing hard against the sidewall. And on the cracked linoleum floor leading from the broken door to the main counter were 3 massive clumps of dried mud, the deep tread of a large work boot. It was definitely not a woman's shoe. I walked around the counter, my boots crunching over the broken glass. I dropped to my knees and looked at the hidden lower shelf where I had left the brown leather notebook the week before. The space was empty. I pulled my phone out with trembling fingers and dialed Wade. He answered immediately over the loud clanging of a wrench hitting metal at his garage. "Someone broke into the shop," I said. My voice sounded hollow and distant, like it belonged to a complete stranger. The clanging in the background stopped instantly. "Are you okay? Where are you right now?" "I am inside the shop," I said. I stared at the muddy boot print on the floor. They took the notebook. "Your mom notebook?" Wade asked, his voice dropping low. "She sent someone," I said. "It had to be her. Nobody else in the entire world knows about this place or what was hidden inside it." The notebook was gone. The handwritten proof that my mother knew everything Margot was doing. The undeniable proof that she had seen me sitting there every night. I squeezed my eyes shut, remembering the evening I first found page 47. The blue ink. The shaky handwriting. I had taken photographs. My accountant brain never allowed me to leave a document without a backup copy. I opened my photo gallery and swiped back through the dates. The pictures were all there. Every single jagged blue word was glowing brightly on my digital screen, but a cold dread settled heavy in my stomach. A photograph on a cellular phone was not the original physical evidence. The police officer closed his small spiral notepad and clicked his pen shut. He stood in the center of the ruined shop looking around with total apathy. "Forced entry and property damage," the officer said, his voice bored. "We will file a formal report at the station, ma'am. But without any security cameras out here on this rural road, it is a dead end. We have no witnesses." He walked out the door, his heavy boots crunching over the glass. I watched his cruiser pull away down the gravel road. The shop was silent again, except for the wind whistling sharply through the broken window pane. The air smelled like wet mud and deeply scratched wood. I sat down hard on the cold floor, resting my back against the side of the wooden counter. The chill from the tile seeped straight through my jeans. I pulled out my phone and called Frank. I told him about the shattered glass, the muddy boot prints, and the missing leather book. I told him I still had the digital photographs saved on my device. Digital photographs of a private diary are extremely problematic, Frank warned. His voice was heavy with grim reality. Without the original physical notebook, the diary entries become classified as hearsay. The photos help establish a timeline, but a good defense attorney will fiercely challenge the chain of custody of those digital images. And Whitaker Lang is full of very good attorneys. I dropped the phone onto the floor beside me. The screen went dark. I pulled my knees up to my chest and wrapped my arms around my legs. I had lost the entire heart of the legal case. Margot had successfully reached out from a city 60 miles away and stolen the only love letter my mother had ever written to me. Her expensive lawyers were going to file their motions, the digital photos would be thrown out of court, and Mr. Henderson was going to fire me for bringing a public scandal to his quiet accounting firm. The broken front door creaked open. Wade walked in. He carried a roll of plastic sheeting and a metal staple gun. He stepped carefully over the scattered debris, walked behind the counter, and sat down on the dirty floor right next to me. He didn't try to hug me. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. Frank said the photos might not hold up in front of a judge, I said to the empty room. Might not, Wade repeated. Depends entirely on the judge. What about all the other paperwork, Wade asked, gesturing toward the overturned shelves. The original property survey, the grandmother trust fund, the county clerk records, those are still solid, I said, staring at a rusted pair of scissors on the floor. But the notebook was the emotional anchor for the entire argument. It proved Mom was fully aware of the fraud. Without the physical book, Margot lawyers can argue Mom was simply confused by her illness and signed the money away willingly. Your mom was never confused a single day in her life, Wade said quietly. I know that, I snapped, my voice cracking. You know that. But proving it in a courtroom without her own words written down on paper is different. I stopped talking and buried my face against my knees. The wind howled through the broken glass again. Wade turned his head and looked at me. His large, grease-stained hands rested flat on his denim thighs. So what? Wade asked. His voice was not soft. It was a direct, unwavering challenge. Are you quitting? I lifted my head and stared at him. I am asking you a direct question. Wade continued, holding my gaze without blinking. Because if you are quitting right now, tell me. I will sweep up this broken glass, I will make us dinner tonight, and we will move on with our lives. But if you are not quitting, then stop sitting on this dirty floor feeling sorry for yourself and figure out exactly what comes next. The sharp smell of the cold wind filling the room suddenly cleared the heavy fog in my head. I looked at the muddy boot print on the floor. Margot paid a stranger to break into a building she did not own. That was a serious crime. She filed a fabricated survey under a shell company using her ex-husband's surname. That was criminal fraud. She used a medical power of attorney to steal money from a dying woman. That was elder exploitation. The brown leather notebook was only one single piece of the puzzle. It was the emotional heart, yes, but Margot took it because she was absolutely terrified. And terrified people made careless, desperate mistakes. I had the original property survey from the licensed company. I had the bank records showing the exact date the trust fund was drained. I had the public visitor logs proving Margot was at the county clerk office. I had the power of attorney document with the forged signature. I had the medical charts from the oncology center proving severe cognitive impairment. I had everything except the diary. And the diary was never meant for the court anyway. My mother wrote those pages so I would know she saw me. She wrote them so I would know my 5 years of silent sacrifice actually mattered to her. I had read the words. I had taken the photographs. I knew exactly what she thought of me. The county judge did not need to read my mother love letter. The county judge only needed to see the hard numbers. And I was an accountant. I placed my hands flat on the cold tile floor and pushed myself up to a standing position. I wiped the gray dust off the back of my jeans. I looked down at Wade sitting on the floor. I need Frank to formally file a police report linking this specific break-in to our pending civil case, I said. My voice was steady now. The tremor was gone. Then I need Frank to subpoena the complete medical records from Dr. Nyman. I need every date, every medication, dosage, and every cognitive assessment from that entire spring. Then I need an independent forensic analysis comparing the original power of attorney signature to Mom's actual handwriting from that exact same month. Wade smiled. It was a small, tight smile, but it reached his eyes. He stood up slowly and picked up his metal staple gun. Dinner first, Wade asked. Dinner first, I said. Sunday morning. Cold coffee. Wade had left before sunrise for an extra shift to cover the legal fees. The apartment was so quiet I could hear the wall clock ticking in the hallway. I opened the silverware drawer and took out Mom's wire-rimmed glasses. I slid them on. The prescription blurred everything. Cabinets softened, sunlight pooled into shapeless white. When she wore these, what did she see me beside her bed measuring medicine? The notebook hidden under her blankets, and Margot slipping further away into a world of blazers and open houses. A memory surfaced, uninvited and vivid. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, nearly a full year before the cancer finally took her. The house on Sycamore Lane was dark. The only sound was the rhythmic pumping of the oxygen concentrator. I was standing next to her bed, adjusting her quilt, when her thin, bruised hand reached out and grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Do not hate your sister," she had whispered. Her eyes were cloudy from the heavy pain medication, but her grip was like iron. "Mom, please just try to rest," I had replied. "She is lost, Jolene," my mother said, her fingers tightening around my arm. "She has been lost since the very day your father left us. She just ran in the completely opposite direction." I pulled the glasses off my face. The kitchen snapped back into sharp, unforgiving focus. The tight knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. My mother had left the beautiful, expensive house to Margot because she knew Margot only understood the brutal language of material worth. Margot needed a massive physical asset to prove she was valuable, to prove she would not be abandoned again. The house was my mother's final desperate way of saying "I still see you" to a daughter who had been running away for 30 years. But the old flower shop, the hidden truth, the quiet patience of growing things from the dirt, that was a language reserved entirely for me. I left the apartment just after noon and drove straight downtown to Tatum House. I didn't call ahead. I just parked my car by the curb and walked up the wooden steps. Dot opened her oak door before I even knocked. She took one long look at my face, grabbed my elbow, and pulled me inside. She didn't ask a single question. She walked straight into her cluttered kitchen and put a copper kettle on the stove. The house smelled like old books, cinnamon sticks, and the dusty warmth of the iron radiator. A large calico cat slept soundly on the back of an antique velvet sofa. On the wall near the pantry door, a framed black and white photograph hung slightly crooked. It showed Dot and my mother standing together in front of Pruitt Garden on its opening day. They looked impossibly young, their hair blown back by the wind, laughing at something just outside the frame. I had never seen that picture before. Dot poured boiling water into a chipped ceramic mug and set it on the table in front of me. "She told me about the wall," Dot said quietly, taking the wooden chair across from me. "She didn't tell me what was actually hidden inside it, just that there was something waiting there. She said, if Jolene comes asking around, tell her to keep going. If she does not come, it means she does not need it." "She thought I might not come to the shop," I asked, staring down at the dark tea leaves swirling at the bottom of the mug. "She thought you might decide to just let the whole thing go," Dot said, wrapping her hands around her own cup. "She knew you were tired. She knew you had a habit of putting your head down and moving on. She thought you might just tell yourself everything was fine." I gripped the edge of the wooden table. That terrible word again. Fine. I had spent my entire adult life pretending every loss and every insult was just fine. "But she also said something else to me," Dot continued. Her voice grew very serious. "She said Jolene does not know how strong she actually is. She thinks her patience is a weakness. She thinks staying quiet means she's losing. It is not a weakness. It is the only strength that actually matters in the very end." I looked up at the framed photograph on the wall. 5 years of washing dirty sheets, tracking pharmacy refills, and biting my tongue when Margot ignored my phone calls. That was patience. Spending hours comparing fraudulent property lines on a county map until my eyes burned. Patience. Waiting for Frank Porter to file the legal motions, waiting for the heavy wheels of the county court to slowly grind forward. Patience was not a passive surrender. It was a loaded weapon. Dot pushed her chair back. She walked over to a heavy wooden hutch against the far wall and pulled a small white envelope from the top drawer. She walked back and handed it to me. "Your mama gave me this about 2 years ago," Dot said. "She asked me to hold on to it. She said give this to Jolene if she ever asks about the old shop. She didn't say when, she just said if." I opened the flap of the envelope. Inside were 5 glossy photographs. They showed the flower shop in its absolute prime. Tin buckets overflowing with vibrant color, my mother standing proudly behind the wooden counter holding a pair of silver shears. But the final photograph made my breath catch hard in my throat. It was me. I was 13 years old, wearing an oversized flannel shirt, standing at the counter arranging a bouquet of yellow tulips. I was looking down at my hands and I was smiling, a real, completely unguarded smile. Monday morning arrived with a clear, sharp chill in the air. I unlocked the front door of the flower shop just after 8 o'clock. Wade had spent his Sunday afternoon replacing the shattered pane of glass in the front door and installing a heavy steel deadbolt, sealing the cold air and the intruders out. The morning light was brilliant and piercing, slicing cleanly through the newly washed windows. The shop did not smell like damp earth and rotting wood anymore. I had stopped at a grocery store on the way over and bought a simple bundle of fresh eucalyptus and white roses wrapped in brown paper. The clean scent of living greenery filled the room, overpowering the smell of the old dust. The space did not feel abandoned or violated. It felt like a stage waiting for the curtain to finally rise. I walked behind the long wooden counter. I laid the manila folder containing the entirety of the legal case flat on the polished wood: the original Henderson survey, the fraudulent Hendricks survey, the stolen trust fund records, the county clerk visitor logs, the medical charts, and the digital printouts of the photographs I had taken of the stolen leather notebook. Right next to the folder, I gently placed my mother glasses. My cellular phone buzzed against the wood. It was Frank Porter. I picked it up and accepted the call. "Good morning, Frank. The forensic signature analysis came back an hour ago," Frank said. His voice carried a tight, victorious edge that I had never heard before. "Your mother's signature on that bank authorization does not match her known signatures from that same time period. The stroke pattern is different. It is far more controlled, much less shaky. Someone else signed it, Jolene. Or someone physically guided her hand over the paper while she was heavily medicated." I looked down at the fresh white roses resting on the counter. "So it is a forgery. Combined with the medical records proving severe cognitive impairment, the fake shell company, and the mismatched property surveys," Frank said, taking a deep breath. "Jolene, we have enough." I picked up the silver shears I had brought from home and snipped the end off a green stem. "Enough for what exactly?" "Enough to win this entire thing," Frank said confidently. "In a courtroom before a county judge, in a closed-door mediation with her corporate lawyers, or however you want to play it. We hold all the cards now." "Not in a courtroom," I said. My voice was dangerously calm. The heat that had been burning a hole in my stomach for 6 weeks had cooled into solid ice. Frank paused. "What do you mean, Margot's grand open house?" I said, setting the shears down next to the glasses. "Her massive launch event for the new independent brokerage on Sycamore Lane." "When exactly is it?" "It is scheduled for this coming Saturday afternoon," Frank said slowly. "She has been heavily promoting it online for 3 solid weeks. She invited the entire local real estate market." "That is where we are going to do it," I said. "Jolene, hold on a minute," Frank cautioned. "We have a very solid legal strategy here. We don't need to turn this into a public spectacle." She called my boss and tried to threaten my employment. I interrupted, the words flowing out of me like freezing water over river stones. She hired a total stranger to break a window and steal my mother's private diary. She robbed a dying woman blind. She doesn't get to quietly settle this behind closed doors while maintaining her pristine public image. She gets exactly one chance to see what I see. I didn't want to destroy my sister out of pure, unchecked vengeance. I wanted her to finally understand the truth. I wanted every person standing in that expensive house drinking champagne to know that the quartz countertops and the polished floors were purchased with stolen money and a forged signature. I wanted the truth to walk right through the front door of her manufactured reality. I placed the tip of my index finger on the edge of the glasses resting on the counter. "Frank," I said, "I need you at that open house on Saturday afternoon. Bring your leather briefcase. Bring all of the physical documents. Every single one of them." A very long pause stretched over the telephone line. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock in his office. "Your mother told me you would say something exactly like that," Frank finally said. "She did?" I asked. "She sat in my office and she said Jolene will not scream, she will not cry, she will just show up with the hard numbers. That is how you will know she really means it." I smiled. It was the very first genuine smile that had touched my face in 6 agonizing weeks. The weight I had been carrying since the reading of the will finally lifted from my shoulders. "I will see you on Saturday, Frank." I ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. I picked up the fresh white roses and began to arrange them in a glass vase. My hands moved with smooth, instinctual muscle memory, sorting and snapping the green stems the way my mother had taught me. Saturday was coming. All I had to do was wait. The street parking on Sycamore Lane was full by the time Wade turned his heavy work truck onto the familiar pavement. Sleek imported sedans and expensive luxury utility vehicles lined both sides of the road, bumper to bumper, gleaming under the bright Saturday afternoon sun. Wade had to park a full block away, pulling his dented, heavy-duty truck right behind a spotless black Lexus. I sat in the passenger seat for a long moment, looking through the windshield at the towering oak trees that formed a canopy over the neighborhood. I wore my dark wool slacks, a simple gray cardigan, and my square-framed glasses. I hadn't dressed up for a high-society networking event. Wade reached over and turned the ignition key. The engine died into a silence. He looked at me, his large hands resting on the steering wheel. He wore clean denim jeans and a freshly washed flannel shirt. He didn't ask if I was ready. He just unbuckled his seatbelt and opened his door. Frank Porter was waiting for us on the sidewalk. He wore an older gray suit that hung slightly loose on his shoulders, and his silver hair was combed neatly back. In his right hand, he carried a scuffed brown leather briefcase. We walked up the winding concrete driveway together. The sprawling front lawn was manicured, the grass cut into precise, sharp lines. A massive, polished wooden sign stood near the front porch steps. The painted letters read, "Pruitt Premier Properties Grand Launch." I reached out and pushed the mahogany double doors open. The blast of warm air that hit my face smelled like expensive melting brie cheese, citrus champagne, and the chemical scent of fresh white paint. The interior of the house was unrecognizable. The wall separating the foyer from the kitchen had been violently torn down. The yellow floral wallpaper our mother had painstakingly chosen 2 decades ago was gone, replaced by severe, stark white drywall. The cozy, cluttered living room where we used to sit and watch television on Sunday evenings was now a open-concept showcase. A sprawling white quartz island dominated the space where the old oak kitchen table used to sit. Every single physical trace of Maeve Pruitt had been scrubbed clean from the property. Over 40 people stood crowded into the expansive room. Real estate colleagues in tailored suits held crystal flutes. Potential investors flipped through thick, glossy brochures. A local lifestyle blogger stood near the fireplace, slowly panning a professional camera across the vaulted ceilings. A jazz quartet played softly in the far corner, their smooth music almost drowned out by the low hum of networking and the clinking of glassware. Margot was standing near the front windows. She wore a pristine white blazer, her nails painted, her bright smile fixed firmly in place. She turned her head and saw me walking through the door. The smile did not leave her face. Her training was far too deep for that, but her eyes narrowed into terrified slits for a fraction of a second. She placed her champagne glass onto a passing waiter's silver tray, whispered something to the tall man standing beside her, and walked briskly across the hardwood floor toward us. "Jolene," Margot said. She projected her voice just loud enough for the immediate circle of investors to hear. "What an absolute surprise. I really did not think this was your kind of scene." I looked at the blank white wall where our mother used to hang our school photographs. "It is Mom's house," I said evenly. "I know every room." The muscles in Margot's jaw tightened so hard I thought her teeth might crack. The jazz quartet finished their song. A polite smattering of applause rippled through the room, followed by a natural lull in the heavy conversation. The sudden quiet was the exact opening I needed. I didn't shout over the crowd. I didn't raise my voice to a hysterical emotional pitch. I simply stepped forward, planting my feet where my mother's old reading armchair used to sit, and I spoke at my normal, measured volume. The sheer gravity of my tone made the surrounding conversations die out instantly. "Before anyone in this room considers putting down an offer on this property," I said, letting my voice carry all the way to the back wall, "there is something you all need to know." Margot stepped forward quickly, reaching her hand out toward my arm. "Jolene, this is absolutely not the time or the place." I didn't stop talking. I didn't even look at her hand. This property was the primary asset of an estate left by Maeve Pruitt, my mother. The woman who lived within these specific walls for 32 years. The woman Margot managed to visit exactly 4 times in 5 years while I changed her adult diapers and held her hand through 3 brutal rounds of chemotherapy. A low, shocked murmur rippled through the crowd of wealthy investors. The lifestyle blogger slowly lowered her camera, her eyes wide. Margot's perfect smile finally shattered, leaving her face pale and rigidly frozen. Frank Porter stepped past my shoulder. He walked to the expensive staging console table in the center of the room. He set his leather briefcase down, unlatched the brass buckles, and pulled out the thick, worn manila folder. "I am Franklin Porter, attorney at law," Frank said. His voice carried the booming, unquestionable authority of a veteran who had spent decades in the county courthouse. I formally represent Jolene Pruitt in a pending civil action regarding the fraudulent manipulation of county property records and the unauthorized illegal disbursement of a family trust fund. This is absolute harassment, Margot hissed. Her voice cracked on the final syllable. I am calling security. Frank opened the folder and laid the first document flat on the quartz table. Exhibit A, the original land survey of the commercial property located at 7 Old Mill Road. It was legally conducted by Henderson Surveying in May of 2019, valuing the property at $210,000. Frank pulled out the second sheet of paper, Exhibit B. A second, entirely fabricated survey filed at the county clerk office by Hendricks Survey Company, a shell corporation legally registered under the name M.E. Kessler. That is your married name, Ms. Pruitt. That fake survey valued the exact same property at $74,000. The shell company was registered 6 months prior to the filing and quietly dissolved 2 months after. The silence in the room became absolute. I could hear the ice shifting and melting in the silver champagne buckets. 40 people stood frozen in place, staring at the woman who had just poured them drinks. She made up a fake surveying company specifically to make my half of the inheritance look completely worthless on paper, I said directly to the crowd. Frank pulled out the final stack of paper. Exhibit C. Certified bank records showing $155,000 from a family trust redirected to a commercial holding account linked directly to your brokerage firm. This transfer was authorized by a medical power of attorney containing a forged signature. It was executed during a period when your mother was heavily documented by her oncology team as being cognitively impaired due to stage 3 narcotic cancer medication. Mom wanted me to have that money to build the business, Margot yelled. Her pristine, untouchable image was collapsing in real time in front of her most important clients. She wanted me to succeed. Mom wanted you to visit, I said quietly. I looked closely at my sister's face. I had fully expected to feel a soaring, intoxicating sense of triumph. I had expected to feel the vindication of a public victory. But looking at her pale, trembling face, all I saw was a terrified 15-year-old girl standing in the front doorway watching our father taillights disappear down the dark street. She had spent her entire life running away from that single moment. She ran toward money, toward absolute control, toward a manufactured image of perfection because she truly believed that if she owned enough expensive things, nobody could ever abandon her again. She wasn't an evil mastermind. She was just deeply, profoundly broken. And the explanation hurt me much more than the actual crime. I walked over to the quartz table and picked up the heavy manila folder. I looked Margot dead in the eyes. I am not going to file criminal fraud charges with the district attorney, I said. I kept my voice low, loud enough for only her and the very front row of investors to hear. I am filing the civil motions for the fair redistribution of the trust fund and the legally accurate recording of the property values. That is it. Margot stared at me. Her chest was heaving beneath the white blazer. She was unable to speak. You can keep the house, Margot, I said. I do not want it. I never did. I turned my back on her and walked toward the front entrance. Wade pushed the mahogany doors open and held them wide. Frank followed closely behind me, his empty briefcase swinging at his side. As the door clicked firmly shut behind us, I heard the collective sound of 40 people exhaling at the exact same time. The late afternoon air had cooled significantly. I walked down the concrete driveway and sat down on the bottom step of the front porch. It was the exact same spot where my mother used to sit and drink her morning tea before the illness took her outside mobility away. Wade walked over to his truck and leaned against the front bumper, crossing his arms over his chest. He was giving me the physical space I needed. 10 minutes passed. The crickets started to chirp in the tall grass near the edge of the pristine lawn. The heavy front door clicked open. Margot walked out into the cold air. She had taken off the tailored white blazer. She stood near the porch railing in a simple silk blouse, rubbing her bare arms to ward off the chill. She tapped her pristine acrylic nails together in a rapid, rhythmic pattern. It was a nervous childhood tic she had never managed to outgrow. She didn't look at me. She stared out at the barren oak trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Did she really write all of that down? Margot asked. Her voice was small and hollow, stripped of its corporate confidence. In the flower book, every single word I said. Margot swallowed hard. The part about her being lost. The part about Dad leaving. You read it, I said. It was a statement of fact, not a question. The guy you hired to break the glass and break into the shop. He handed the book directly to you. Margot did not deny it. She slowly lowered herself down onto the cold concrete step, keeping 3 full feet of distance between us. She pulled her knees together. "I read the entry from April 20th, Margot whispered, staring at the driveway. "The page where Mom says she had to hide the legal documents inside the brick wall because she knew I would find them and destroy them." "Yes," I said. "She was absolutely right," Margot said. A single tear finally cut through her perfect makeup, leaving a shining trail down her cheek. "I would have put them in an office shredder without a second thought." The wind picked up, rustling the dry leaves on the oak branches above us. "I wasn't trying to steal your entire life from you," Margot said, her voice breaking. "I was just trying to secure the assets. I don't even know what I was trying to do anymore." "Yes, you do," I said. Margot finally turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes were red and tired. "You were trying to win," I told her, keeping my voice gentle but completely firm. "The exact same way you have been trying to win since the day Dad walked out the door and left us. But this was never a competition, Margot. And Mom was never a prize to be won." I stood up from the cold concrete step. I brushed the dust off the back of my slacks. I didn't forgive her. Not today. I might not ever completely forgive her. But the heavy, suffocating anger that had been crushing my chest for 6 long weeks was gone. I walked down the driveway toward Wade. I left the front door open behind me, but I didn't look back. 3 months later, the wooden door of Pruitt Gardens swung open. The small brass bell attached to the frame jingled brightly, a sharp and cheerful sound that echoed through the room. The shop was alive again. The stale air was gone, replaced by the deep, rich smell of wet potting soil and blooming gardenias. The heavy iron shelves were packed tight with vibrant ferns and trailing green ivy. The walls had been painted a warm, clean cream color. The new floral refrigerator hummed a steady, comforting rhythm in the back corner, fully stocked with galvanized tin buckets of white roses and fresh baby breath. The hand-painted sign out front had been carefully sanded and restored. The letter G was bright and unmistakable from the road. I stood behind the polished wooden counter, trimming the thick stems of a massive eucalyptus arrangement. It was my very first large order, a wedding centerpiece for a local family. My hands moved with smooth, instinctual muscle memory, sorting and snapping the green stems the way my mother had taught me when I was 13 years old. Dot Tatum sat in a newly purchased wicker chair in the corner of the room near the front window. It was her designated permanent seat. She wore a bright yellow sweater and held a white bakery box in her lap. "Your mama would have a heart attack if she saw the prices you are charging people for these weddings," Dot said, shaking her head as she took a bite of a powdered donut. "It is called inflation, Dot," I said, without looking up from my silver shears. "Inflation, my behind," Dot laughed loudly, crumbs falling onto her sweater. "That is a $40 arrangement, and you know it. It is a $65 arrangement crafted with deep love and extensive botanical expertise," I shot back, smiling at the stems. Dot let out a loud, booming laugh. For a brief second, the sound bouncing off the brick walls sounded exactly like Maeve. Wade walked out from the back storage room. He was wiping thick black axle grease off his large hands with a red cloth rag. "The back shelving unit is fully secured to the studs," he said. "Do you want the hanging fern display mounted up high near the ceiling or down lower at eye level?" "Eye level," I said immediately. "People should be able to see the roots without having to stretch their necks." Wade nodded once and disappeared back into the storage room. The brass bell jingled again. A woman in a tan winter coat walked in. She looked to be in her mid-50s. She stopped in the center of the clean room and looked around at the exposed brick walls, breathing in the smell of the eucalyptus. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Is this the specific flower shop from the story?" I blinked, lowering the silver shears to the counter. "What story? I saw an article online," the woman explained, pulling her leather purse higher on her shoulder, written by a local lifestyle blogger. "Something about a woman who fought a massive inheritance battle with a corporate real estate firm just to keep this little shop open." "That is me," I said. The woman smiled warmly, the kind lines around her eyes crinkling. "Well, I just wanted to drive out here and buy some flowers from you." I wiped my hands on my canvas apron. "What is the special occasion?" "No occasion at all," the woman said, walking over to look at the bucket of white roses. "I just like knowing where my money is going." I finished wrapping her flowers in brown paper, tied them with a piece of twine, and watched her pull out of the gravel driveway. The shop grew quiet again. The country music radio station played softly from the back room. I reached under the counter and pulled out a brand new notebook. It was bound in brown leather, almost identical to the one Margot had stolen. I opened the crisp white cover. On the very first line, I used a black pen to write the details of the wedding centerpiece order. My cellular phone vibrated on the counter. It was sitting right next to my mother, old wire-rimmed glasses. I never wore the glasses, but I kept them there on the polished wood every day, just so she could watch. I picked up the phone. It was a text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the Indianapolis area code immediately. I drove past the shop on the highway today. The new sign looks really good. I stared at the glowing screen. I didn't type a reply. I wasn't ready for that yet. I might not be ready to reply for years, but I didn't delete the message either. I set the phone face down on the wood. I walked over to the highest shelf on the back wall. I took a fresh, blooming white gardenia from a bucket of water and placed it into a small ceramic pot. I set the pot exactly where the jar of dead brown flowers had sat for 15 years. The new petals were bright, open, and alive. The legal settlement had been finalized. The trust fund was divided exactly in half. The property records were permanently corrected. Margot had kept the massive house, but the public scandal had ruined her grand launch. She was currently working quietly at a different firm, trying to rebuild her reputation from the ground up. I picked the silver shears back up. I grabbed the next green stem from the pile. And without even realizing I was doing it, I started to hum a low, quiet tune in the back of my throat. Mom had told me that someday this place would bloom again. She was never talking about the flowers.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.